Well, welcome back to the Good Medicine Podcast, where we dive deep into the science behind today's most promising advances in human health. I'm Dr. David Beers, and I'm here joined with another Dr. Beers, Dr. Jeremiah Beers, my brother, and we're talking about something that affects nearly every chronic disease, and it's something that I think people are thinking more and more about, and that is chronic inflammation. And, we're going to talk a little bit about what chronic inflammation is and how it's different than acute inflammation. Acute inflammation, I think everyone's familiar with that. It's the kind of inflammation you feel after you twist your ankle or you have an infection from a virus like a cold virus. And the acute inflammation is a good thing. We don't want to inhibit that. It's your body's natural immediate response to injury or an infection. So that's, how do you separate between those two things? And back in the old days, I was a professor for a while. I taught at medical school. I taught medical students. JJ went to medical school. So, you were taught. We're actually taught. Yeah. So you were taught that inflammation, the signs of inflammation were redness, swelling, heat. What am I missing? Immobilization of joints and things like that. So
I said the Latin's like rubor.
There's all those mnemonics people use for it. But that's really focused on acute inflammation. And we used to teach people that chronic inflammation was actually just the failed resolution of acute inflammation, that you had some sort of acute inflammatory response that just never went away. Yeah. Because as the name implies, acute inflammation is supposed to happen and then resolve, but chronic inflammation is a little different. And we've learned a lot about it in the past few years. And I think we'll spend a few minutes just breaking that down. So chronic inflammation, we call it a low-grade persistent immune activation. So normally our immune system, it's like, it's the first line of defense for our body for either damage or infection. So if we have something that is either hurt our body, what our body's immediate response is to try to isolate that area, because it doesn't, your cells in your body don't know what's going on. And so what they do is say, hey, I just got a signal that something bad happened, and so I'm going to try to isolate that area. I'm going to try to cordon it off. I'm going to keep it so if it is something that is an infectious thing, it can't spread. And I'm going to try to recruit other cells to come and try to figure out what's going on. And that's the normal acute inflammatory response.
Now, the immune system's really good at being like, something is wrong. I don't know what it is. I'm going to figure this out, but something is wrong. And that's really, almost everything starts with some sort of acute reaction, acute phase. It's like you said, it's something we're all familiar with. And that's a good thing. Yep. We want that to happen because it can prevent a lot of bad things from happening. 500 years ago, when we didn't have all the medicines and things that we had, that was the way that people would stay alive.
That was all we had, right? So our immune system's kind of split up into two parts. We have our innate immune system, which is there monitoring things all the time. And then we have the adaptive immune system, which is there to protect us in the future, to say, hey, I ran into this thing, and I want to protect us in the future. And that's how we develop immunity. When we talk about, I have an adaptive immune response or adaptive immunity. Why we give vaccines to people is we try to vaccinate them to get an adaptive response, so in the future they're protected. So all of that stuff all works together, and inflammation is part of all of that. And it's really driven initially by the innate immune response. But chronic inflammation has been something that has actually been hard for us to figure out. But it's a low-grade, persistent, low level of inflammation. Because normally when you have an inflammatory response, it's all hands on deck. Everybody come. Let's figure this thing out.
The house is on fire.
House is on fire. We got to turn this. But to put out the fire. But that's why it's so difficult, and it's been difficult to study, because it's really invisible, right? You don't really know you have chronic inflammation until it really manifests itself as a chronic disease. And that's probably something everybody's familiar with, is we've heard that inflammation is the root of all disease. And I think there's truth to that we know that chronic inflammation is a real driver not just a bystander. It's not just something that happens, but it actually drives conditions like type 2 diabetes, obesity, Alzheimer's disease, heart disease, atherosclerosis, even stuff that maybe not be so obvious to people, but things like depression, cancer, early stages of cancer are actually supported and initiated by chronic inflammation.
Yeah, it's interesting because, anytime our immune system is working properly, it takes care of cancer cells before they have a chance to form. But if you generate this area of inflammation that the immune system is not working as well in, it allows cancer cells to grow. And that's kind of newer understanding of why cancer develops, because initially it's like, oh, it's just piles on these mutations until it escapes. It's like, well, that's part of it, but it also is a failure of the body to recognize that something is wrong until it's too late.
Yeah, we've known for a long time that our immune system is actually involved in monitoring and preventing us from developing cancer. Yeah. And cancer cells figure out how to evade immune responses to the cancer. And part of the way they do that is by invoking this persistent chronic inflammatory signaling, because one of the things that happens is when you have an acute inflammatory response is certain type of cells are actually prevented from coming in. And the cancer cells, even though it kind of sets up kind of a hostile environment, they'd rather have that than having T cells coming in and trying to kill them. So they figure out how to adjust to it. And
I know we're going to plan on talking about this later because we're both cancer biologists at heart, but cancer likes the hostile environment. It can grow in just about anything.
Yeah, that's right.
And be irrespective of that. But really, it does have to escape the immune system before it can do anything. Like your mentor would always say, it takes something like 26 years for cancer to develop from a single cell to where we can see on imaging.
Yeah. So all of us have the early stages probably at some at some level going on all the time, and there's a balance between what our immune system's doing. So let's talk a little bit more about how do immune cells get kind of stuck in this on mode. And so these are specific types of cells that are designed to fight infection and to heal wounds, to help clean up when we have damage. You twist your ankle. What happens when you twist? You actually tear tissue, and that tissue damage releases signals that tells the immune system, we've had a problem here. Come figure out what's wrong and help clean it up.
The body really doesn't like stuff where it shouldn't be.
That's right.
If you have blood where blood shouldn't be,
That's
or
right.
tissues where they shouldn't be, or things like that, it's going to recognize and it's going to say, hey, this is wrong. Come down here and fix it.
And the way that it does that, so people say, well, how do these cells know what to do? It all comes down to messages that are sent. And those messages are in the form of chemical messengers, and they're usually secreted proteins or peptides, hormone type of molecules that are secreted at the area of injury. So it's either the place, so you cut your skin, and when you cut your skin, you immediately have bacteria that will be there, and those immune cells will recognize that, and they start sending out these chemical messengers, and we call them chemokines and cytokines. They're proteins that are involved in triggering this cascade of events that happens. So you may have heard of there's lots of commercials on TV for drugs that target TNF alpha, for example. So drugs that their trade names are Humira or Skyrizi, and if you stay up late and watch certain channels and watch news channels, they advertise for drugs that target these things a lot. But those are the effector molecules that are released by the sentinels, so that we have sentinel cells that are looking for problems, and then they release these signals to say here's an issue. So those type of sentinel cells, there's cells that are involved in what we call antigen presentation. So things like macrophages and dendritic cells are involved in mediating some of these inflammatory responses. Macrophages, microglial cells in our brain kind of do the same thing. And when they become activated, they release these messengers. So in chronic inflammation, what happens is that these cells kind of get stuck in the on position. And we've been trying to figure out how did they do that and why did they do that? And what are the triggers that actually drive that? So the normal acute inflammatory response, that the body responds to danger signals. And those come, as we mentioned, either from pathogens, things that are infecting us. So they could be either viruses or bacteria. And those are fungus, parasites, all of those things. Actually,
any foreign DNA,
any
or foreign
that's
protein,
right. Foreign invaders.
Essentially,
the
immune system has, like, it's like we said, there's the innate, the adaptive. This is all part of the innate immune system, where anything that is abnormal, foreign, that the body does not recognize as self, it will trigger these, and it'll kind of cause this initial. And that's why it's able to respond as quickly as it does. I mean, if you get a cut or scrape, within minutes you can see it start to swell and have redness. And
even seconds. In some way.
I mean, it'll bring blood to the body,
exactly,
and see it happen there. And that's all just. There's no time for the immune system to adapt or change. This is all built-in natural defenses. Think like a castle wall, right? It's just there. It's present. I mean, you have the natural barrier of your skin, but once that's broken, you have all of these different chemical messengers and things that can respond and adapt really quickly, because they're already present, and they say, hey, something is wrong. We don't know what. Bring everybody.
Send in the troops. And they respond to, so we have, there are certain differences in responses. So the body can kind of tell right away, is this a pathogen? We call them pathogen-associated molecular patterns, or PAMPs. And then we have cell damage or stress, and those are damage-associated molecular patterns, or DAMPs. So PAMPs and DAMPs are the way that the scientists talk about it. And those signals are detected on the surface of certain immune cells with receptors that are called pattern recognition receptors. And those pattern recognition receptors, there's a bunch of different types. There's toll-like receptors, nod-like receptors, RIG1 type receptors. There's the C-gas-sting pathway, which detects cytosolic DNA, which shouldn't be there. And so there's lots of things that are built into this innate immune response. And so it's split up into stages. And so just like everything, we've kind of figured out how these stages work. So the first thing that this cell wants, or the body wants to do, is recognize what's going on. So there's a recognition stage. So we have sentinel immune cells like macrophages, dendritic cells, mast cells. Those are there, and they're built to recognize the PAMPs and DAMPs. So they're looking for pathogen patterns or damage patterns, and they're there to recognize that we have a problem. And then they're once they become activated, they release these inflammatory mediators. So cytokines, chemokines, histamines, and prostaglandins. These are things that, whether you know those names or not, you're actually familiar with all these things. I think everybody knows what an antihistamine is, right?
Yeah.
So and antihistamine is, you take that when you have an allergic response. What allergic response is, you actually your body's detected something that it doesn't like, and it sees as a pathogen or a damage signal, and so it triggers a response. And so we've developed drugs that can help block some of these things. And so the things that we're all familiar with is ibuprofen, acetaminophen, antihistamines. Those all work at the level of these activation signals. So these signals that are there to say, we've recognized the problem, we've now activated the immune system, let's start getting the troops ready to rock and roll and come in. And so this causes vasodilation.
They're getting their steak and lobster, right?
That's right. They're getting
in the U.S. military.
That's right. If you're BioHive is a nonprofit building the future of healthcare innovation right here in Utah. As one of the nation's fastest growing life science industries, they bring together scientists, entrepreneurs, students, and companies to create breakthroughs that save lives and strengthen our economy. Whether you're in a lab or at a startup, BioHive is here to build, brand, and bring together a thriving life science community, and there's a place for you. Learn more, get involved, and see their latest happenings at biohive.com. You're feeding steak and lobster, you're going to war, right? So this causes vasodilation, so that, our circulatory system has a response. Capillary permeability. So one of the things that we see right away in an inflammatory response is changes in the vasculature. So that's,
that's why you get swelling.
That's why you get swelling. Exactly.
So the vessels, everything opens up, it's delivering blood there. And then the actual membrane itself becomes more permeable so that those cells can go out into the tissue and target what they need to.
So once that happens, then you move into what's called the recruitment and effector function. And so those are different kinds of cells. Normally mostly those are neutrophils and monocytes. So those are specific types of white blood cells. And what those things do is they go in and start eating stuff, right? They're there to find pathogens. So your neutrophils their white blood cells are looking for the bacteria and say, I found a bacteria, I'm going to eat those. And they release reactive oxygen species, and they release proteases, and those help maintain that activated response. So they're saying, hey, I found something bad here. I need more help. We have monocytes, which are a different type of white blood cell that arrive a little bit later, and they mature into macrophages. So they're circulating cells that will mature into macrophages, and the macrophages are there to help clear up all the mess and eat the debris. And the macrophages are actually what are responsible for orchestrating the resolution of inflammation. So they're part of the response, but they're also there to help de-escalate and resolve the inflammation. And so then T cells and natural killer cells can also be recruited to help in more complex and in chronic settings as well. So that's kind of a quick, that's 2
years of immunology.
That's 2 years of immunology summarized into a very short little segment. But then what's supposed to happen is you're supposed to resolve or escalate. So if something continues to be a problem, then you can actually continue to escalate. So ideally, you get these pro-resolving mediators. They're just like the chemokines and cytokines. They're secreted messengers that tell the immune system, all right, we figured it out. It's time to get rid of the inflammatory response. Let's start healing. So damaged tissue is usually repaired by fibroblasts, the specific type of cell. When you cut yourself,
you want this to occur because say you get a cut and the inflammation is present, it's not going to heal.
That's right.
I mean, people who have like diabetic foot wounds or other things, it's just this chronic inflammatory response.
No, if you've had non-healing wound,
and
that's exactly what it is.
They never get healed, and it's because the inflammation is not allowing for those good healing things to come back in and do their stuff.
And what's fascinating about how the body deals with this is, so the fibroblasts get recruited to help fix the tissue, and we're all familiar with scars. That's what happens when you cut yourself. Your fibroblasts try to fix it as best they can, but sometimes they can't completely restore like your skin tissue back to its normal state, and so you get a scar that forms. But what's interesting about the immune cells is they're all supposed to die. Yeah. So what's interesting is the way we turn off the immune system is we kill all the cells, right? They actually don't have an off switch. Their off switch is die. It's time for you all to die. And so there's actually inflammatory forms of cell death. Some immune cells will actually return to the lymph so your lymph nodes, the lymph node organs, and those are there to help retain the memory. So the one thing,
long-term memory.
That's right. We want to remember if we ran into a pathogen, we saw a virus or we saw a bacteria, we want to remember what that was. And so we keep resident some memory immune cells, and those live in our lymph nodes. And so we can talk sometime later about how all that works. It's kind of complicated, but it's amazing how it works. And it's remarkable.
The immune system is one of the our understanding of it continues to grow. It's heinously complex, if you can't tell from our discussion already. And there are thousands of labs across the world that study individual pieces of this. And so our understanding of the immune system has grown, but it also it's so incredibly complex and difficult. It's shocking to me. I think we've talked about this before, how it works so much more than it doesn't. Like the fact that it works more, there are not more problems associated with all of the complexity of the immune system is frankly remarkable.
It's a miracle. Yeah, it really is. Yeah. When you think about all the things that have to happen in an orchestrated way,
just for you to heal a cut,
and then it's supposed to all go away and not have a problem.
And the vast majority of the time,
it works.
Yeah.
When it doesn't work, we have problems. Yeah. And so we know all the way down to the molecular level. So we've just talked about the tissue and cell-based response. We actually know what's going on all the way down to the types of genes and proteins that get activated. So we know that there's this signaling pathway that triggers a a transcription factor called NF-kappa B. NF-kappa B is one of the main mediators. And one of the ways that we know inflammation from a molecular way, we can stain and look for these proteins. If NF-kappa B is in the nucleus of a cell, then we know that it's mediating an inflammatory response. It is the way. So the NF-kappa B kind of sits out in the cytoplasm of the cell. It waits for a certain signal, and then it goes into the nucleus and it turns on the expression of different genes. One of those genes is one that we've been very interested in. It's called NLRP3, and it's part of a group of multi-protein complexes called inflammasomes. So back in the day, I taught in medical school, and I didn't, when I taught many years ago, we didn't know anything about this. Yeah. It was, this is relatively new. We've discovered that these. The way that at the molecular level, the way that the individual cells are mediating these responses is they're forming these quite large complexes inside the cell to help respond to these damage and pathogen signals. And so one of these that's really been implicated in chronic inflammation is this protein complex called the NLRP3 inflammasome. We tend to just abbreviate and call it the inflammasome. There's actually lots of inflammasomes, but NLRP3 is the one that's most well studied, and it's the one that is most most tightly associated with chronic inflammation. And what NLRP3 does is it activates a protein called caspase-1, and caspase-1, its whole job is to mature these cytokines. So the cytokines, when they're produced, they're in an inactive form, and they have to be activated before they get released and trigger this immune response. So the cytokines that caspase-1 activate, the main two are IL-1 beta and IL-18. And what's interesting is those two, different than TNF-alpha and IL-6 and some of the ones that we hear, the drugs that are out there that we're using all the time, they're at the very top. They're the ones that help trigger the very beginning of the response. And so we've figured out all this stuff and how all this works. There's a bunch of other molecular pathways that get activated. The JAK-STAT signaling pathway is very important. That pathway is involved in almost all the cytokine receptors. So these cytokines, when they're released, they bind to a receptor on an effector cell to activate. And when the cytokine gets activated, it turns on what we call the JAK-STAT pathway.
There's a lot of drugs,
and there's a lot of drugs in that pathway now as well. So that's kind of how it works, how inflammation works. So when you compare what an acute inflammatory response and what a chronic inflammatory, the duration is very different. And that really, when it comes down to, is the scope of the response, how long it lasts. So acute inflammation should resolve at most in days. Mm-hmm. It should be actually hours if you're really healthy and you respond quickly. When you're young and you twist your ankle, you're back running around the next day. Yeah, if I do it now, it takes me weeks to respond sometimes, and that's because as we age, we actually accumulate damage, and so the priming of our immune system, when we're young, we have a quite long fuse to turn on the immune system. When we're old, our immune system, we have the shortest fuse. Yeah. And some people's fuse is gone. This is on all the time. And that is chronic inflammation. And so the cells involved, macrophages and chronic inflammation seem to be the main bad actors, because they're the ones that are supposed to help resolve the whole process, and they kind of get stuck in the on position, and that's one of the challenges. So we can distinguish now. There are key differences in terms of the molecular events and the cellular events that happen to keep these processes on all the time. So now let's talk a little bit about what differentiates chronic inflammation from acute inflammation. So in chronic inflammation, really what the key difference is the immune system just fails to turn off. It hasn't returned to its it's homeostasis, it's kind of basal level. But what's interesting is it's not fully on either. So it's kind of at this low level fire. So it's not burning down your house, but you've got a grease fire on your stove.
It's because you don't see the swollen red, all the things that you see with acute inflammation. Like you said, most of the time you can't even tell if somebody is chronically inflamed. I could be chronically inflamed right now and I wouldn't know. It's a kind of quasi in between where you're getting the accumulating damage from the ongoing inflammation, but it's also the immune system doesn't necessarily think anything is wrong.
Yeah. So it's kind of a weird situation because the full immune response isn't happening, but the damage is the problem. So we just talked about when you activate the inflammatory signal, the whole point is you have cells coming in and cleaning up a mess. If they can't find the mess, they're actually going to cause a mess, right?
Yeah.
So they'll look around and say, I don't really see anything wrong. Well, maybe that's the problem. And they're going to start creating problems. So what's interesting is that in conditions that we've known for, so like, for example, I think most people would know that cardiovascular disease, they'd say, oh, that's associated with cholesterol, cholesterol plaques that form in your artery. Well, it's interesting that those plaques by themselves are actually not the problem. It's when the immune system sees that as a problem.
Wait, what are you doing here?
It's like,
hey, attacks, and then inflammation goes, and you get a heart attack.
That's when you get a heart attack. Yeah. But examples of things like of chronic inflammation, obesity, we already talked about. Adipose tissue macrophages are constantly activated. They secrete these chemical messengers and keep it in a persistent, chronically inflamed state. And what that does, and obesity is a great example, is it completely changes the function of that tissue. And the same thing happens in your pancreas. It can happen in your brain. It can happen in your liver and your lungs. So chronic inflammation can pretty much affect everything. So the question is, now that we've kind of figured out what's the difference between acute and chronic inflammation and what's keeping these things on, we're starting to develop therapies that can actually modulate these responses and can discriminate between the chronic inflammatory response and the acute inflammatory response. So one of the things that we're working on right now is how do you turn off the inflammasome? And that's been interesting because, as I mentioned, it's one of the main drivers of chronic inflammation. When that thing doesn't turn off, it's what's responsible for that kind of low-grade persistent inflammation. And so we figured out a way to turn it off. It's actually, the big protein complex has an enzymatic function, and there's ways to try to block the enzymatic function. We think an interesting way to actually turn off the inflammasome and make it go away. Yeah. So to promote the disassembly of this big protein complex. Because it turns out that kind of is what's wrong, is that complex is supposed to go away, and when it stays there, that's what's kind of keeping this thing on. So we think that there's a real future. As we mentioned, there's new drugs that are out there. If you watch television, you're going to see JAK inhibitors are now. What if you could get rewarded just for being healthier? Meet Galvin, the company using the latest blockchain technology to reward you for taking care of yourself. They help with your mind, body, and soul like a personalized health assistant to track your progress and help you feel better. Galvin's G Plus app rewards you for exercise and assesses your mental health in under a minute using AI and over 2,500 voice biomarkers. If you're feeling off, G Plus gives you personalized power-ups, science-backed techniques to help you feel better fast. And here's the best part. When you prioritize your wellness, you earn crypto. Ready to level up your health? Use promo code GOODMED20 at checkout for 20% off. Download G Plus today at the Apple app or Google Play Store and start your wellness journey with Galvin.
The best drug we've probably ever made as a species targets the immune system. Steroids. Steroids are so I just finished my internal medicine residency training, and there is no drug that's used in more different possible clinical settings than steroids. And what does it do? It just basically turns off the immune system.
Shuts off inflammation. Now, the challenge with steroids, they're wonder drugs for a very short period of time.
For a week.
Yeah, so you can't take steroids for a long time. And NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, they try to do the same thing. So they're good for short bursts or for targeted suppression. So you can take a shot with a steroid in a specific place, and people are familiar with that. Your knees swollen, your back, you have a bulging disc in your back. You can get shots, but they're not designed to reset the system, and that's the problem. Is they have a short-term suppression of the messaging, but the signal's still on. And so
the hope is that when we give it, the body recognizes, hey, I don't need to be inflamed anymore.
And
I
I'll
can
kill
turn
all
this
those
off.
immune cells.
But when you switch into chronic inflammation, you feel better for a little bit, and then, oh great, now we're back on again. Nothing really changed, because the steroid, it's actually something endogenous in our body that normally is produced, and we just give lots of it.
Yeah, we just borrowed it and said, well, that seems to do the trick. Let's just try to turn that into a therapeutic. And like you said, it works. But the problem is it doesn't shut down the system. It doesn't reset the system. Yeah. And so you still have that problem. So now we're in the frontier now of trying to figure out how do we turn off chronic inflammation at its source? How do we reset whatever's persisting to keep that system on? How do we reset that? So there's ways that we can now try to develop drugs that target only specific cells that are the problem. As I mentioned, macrophages macrophages in the rest in our systemic system, not in our brain, but everywhere else, macrophages are kind of the driver of chronic inflammation. In our brain, the brain has a little bit different immune system. It doesn't have the same kinds of cells, but it's microglial cells. So we have ways to try to specifically target those cells. In fact, we even are developing cell-based therapeutics to actually specific target those cells. And so we inject engineered cells into our body that will go in and turn off those specific types of cells. There's a lot of really interesting stuff happening in that area. We're working, as I mentioned, on NLRP3 inhibitors. Those are brand new. Nobody's really done that in the past, and so they're all in early stage clinical development. One of the things that we're excited about is trying to come up with ways to make those proteins fall apart and disappear, and we have new ways to do that. We try to develop drugs that work allosterically, which means that we change the shape of the protein. And one thing, if I can teach you anything about biology 101, is structure drives function. So if you can change the structure of a protein, you can change its function. And allosteric drugs change the structure of the protein. And so most of the drugs that we have that are effective actually compete for the enzymatic activity, which is a lot of the functions in our body are driven by proteins that catalyze chemical reactions, and we call those proteins enzymes. And so if you can gum up the works in those enzymes, you can stop a lot of chemical reactions in the body, which drives a lot of the cell function.
There's huge signaling pathways, and you can essentially target any number of these. I mean, there are all different types of drugs that target the exact same pathway, just at different locations. And I always think the higher up on a pathway, or the more toward the very top of it, the more effect you might have lower down, but then you're also going to have more side effects. Exactly. Whereas if you can go somewhere more in the middle, or target a different offshoot of the pathway, or maybe not its main function. I mean, that's why we always look at drug selectivity. We look at targetability. We look at all of these things, because it's great if you can target what you want. It's not good to target a lot of things, because then the body shuts down.
Yeah, I mean, I could get rid of all the inflammation in the body by killing all the immune cells in the body, and we can do that. Yeah. But it's probably not the smartest thing to do. I mean, we don't want to immunosuppress everybody and just get rid of our whole immune system.
If you've ever been around someone with a stem cell transplant or something else,
exactly,
it's exactly what we do.
Yeah, exactly. We wipe out your bone marrow. You can't make any more white blood cells.
You have to go into the room. I've been told that in these people, a paper cut is an emergency. Yeah. And so your immune system, I know we're kind of ragging on it right now, but it's a remarkable thing, and you don't want to turn it off.
Yeah.
And so this idea of, well, how can we turn off parts or pieces, or what's the bad
So what
actor?
we're trying to do is to retrain it, not suppress it, but retrain it and to nudge it back into balance. So that's the key. And I think that's the future for medicine. That's what we're trying to do. And that's the next generation of good medicines in this area are medicines that are not going to suppress, but retrain and nudge our immune system back into balance so that because right now we can wipe things out, but we're
good at it.
But then, but then, the treatment's worse than the disease, right? Yeah. So we've got to figure out a way that how do we take the knowledge that we have and figure out how to retrain the system. One of the things that I think, that matters the most is intervening as early as possible. Sure. So we know that chronic inflammation isn't a symptom, it's actually a root cause. And we now have some tools to try to control it and try to manipulate that system. And so can we prevent diseases before they start by targeting chronic inflammation? We know a lot of these things are associated with age. And there's a big debate right now, is aging a disease? I mean, it's kind of funny to think about it, right?
Yeah.
But it has a lot of the hallmarks of disease, right? That it's progressive and and it's certainly, as we get older, we're more prone to these types of things. So part of, I think, one of the new areas of research right now is, what if by the time we hit 40, or whatever the number is, that we start intervening in a preventative way to help suppress inflammation. Now, there's certainly, we talk from a therapeutic side because we're therapeutic guys. We're working on trying to develop drugs, but your immune system responds to nutrients that are there. One way to really mess up your immune system is to give it. Your immune system loves sugar. It loves glucose, and if you give your immune system a lot of glucose, it'll activate without all of those signals that we just talked about. If you push it hard enough, it'll just say, well, okay, I'm now turned on because I got plenty of fuel. So part of the reason why all those changes happen is to make sure the immune system has enough fuel to actually do what it needs to do. And if you give it fuel without having a problem, it'll figure out that it'll just create a problem, right? So the question is, can we suppress that? And that's one of the challenges, and one of the reasons why we're excited about the obesity pandemic has shown us that glucose control and glucose regulation is so if we can get that under control, we can actually affect a lot of these chronic diseases. And to be honest, when we look at the long-term benefits of these GLP-1 drugs like Ozempic and Mounjaro that are out there, is actually reducing chronic inflammation. And that's what it comes down to.
There's longevity benefits too.
Exactly.
They're starting to study these. It's interesting. So there is this whole kind of field where people are looking at longevity. And I actually did a presentation on low-dose rapamycin. People are taking this right now. Rapamycin was originally developed as an anti-rejection medication.
That's right.
So
modulating the immune system.
Yeah, modulating the immune system, right?
Yep.
Metformin people are studying in longevity. What does it do? Well, it probably modulates the immune system in some ways, causes some weight loss, and helps with sugar regulation.
Yep.
And then the Ozempics and these new drugs, the GLP-1s, again, they are causing decreases in inflammation through targeting obesity and other systems there. So the reason why we maybe don't see survival benefits in some of these other stronger anti-inflammatories is because you then have the flip side of the immune system where you get sick.
Too much suppression. You go the opposite way.
Yeah.
So, what we're trying to do is we're trying to put out the beginnings, the sparks of the fires, right? Not waiting until your house is burning down and trying to come in with a big hammer to hammer the immune system. But let's figure out ways to stop the sparks that are actually starting the fire. And I think, so for us, I think the future for medicine is really trying to come up with new ways to target chronic inflammation. And the next time you hear of or you get prescribed a drug that's trying to target chronic inflammation, realize it might be doing more than you think, right? Yeah. And it may be part of a revolution that's changing how we age healthful in a healthy way, how we heal from disease, and how we live in a better, healthier way. So for me, that's the future of medicine. Is we've got to switch from being reactionary and waiting for people to get sick and start figuring out how do we keep people healthy. And I think that resonates with everybody, right? I mean, nobody wants to get sick. I think the last thing I want to do is go to the hospital. It's the last place I want to be. And it's funny, as people in the medical profession to say, the last thing I want to do is go see a doctor. And I want to be healthy, right?
Yeah.
I want to figure out ways that I can be healthy. So there are definite things that we can do with nutrition. We didn't even talk about exercise. Exercise has a profound effect on inflammation, a profound effect on our immune system. Mm-hmm. But if those two things aren't enough, there are medicines that, and obviously we're talking about good medicines, and at the end of the day, our body's our best medicine, and just allowing our body to do what it does best, and trying to eliminate, when we have something stuck in a loop, if we can reset that loop and then let the body, reset and heal.
Yeah.
That's
I always say
thing.
the single best thing I can do as a doctor in treating a patient is letting the body heal itself.
Exactly.
And so whatever it can't overcome, I try and assist it with that. I mean, kids, if you've ever been in a pediatric ward or seen them, they bounce back so fast. And it's because their immune system is primed for them to recover. I mean, kids are remarkable in things that would kill anybody else. Kids just bounce right back. I think one reason why kids do better, the main reason is their immune system just seems to work better. And they are able to tolerate a lot more of that because they have so much more reserve. And so, like you said, if we can keep it from going, if you were to stop the aging process at like the age of 12, you'd live thousands of years. I mean, it's
because your ability to regenerate, your ability, when you're that young is amazing compared to when you're my age, right? I have very little regenerative capacity left.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you start losing stuff and it's not coming back, right? So, yeah, it's fascinating. So we've got a lot of fun things that we're learning, and just amazing, fascinating new science. I think next time we'll come and talk to you about work that we're doing on genetic resilience. So just teasing for the future. If you've ever wondered why, we all inherit bad genes, right? All of us have them, but only some of us get sick. And so the question is, how do some of us stay resilient in the face of bad genetics? And there's a lot to talk about there. So anyway, we're making progress all the time, and we hope that the future is that we can have better medicines, good medicines that we could talk about. So thanks for joining us today. Hopefully you learned something about inflammation. Hopefully it was insightful. And if you felt that way, please share it with somebody else. And remember, subscribe. We've got more episodes coming. We'll be talking to a lot of exciting people. We're going to talk more about cutting edge therapeutics, about metabolic reprogramming. And, we think that the future is unlocking human resilience. And that's what I'm excited about. So until next time, stay curious and stay well. And thanks for joining Good Medicine. That's it for today's episode of Good Medicine. Thanks for joining us as we explore the science and stories behind health, medicine, and innovation. If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's a great zero-cost way to support us. In addition, please click, follow, and leave a review for the podcast on Apple and Spotify. If you have questions or comments for me, please put them in the comments section on YouTube or reach out on all social media platforms at Good Medicine. Links are in the description. The best way to support the podcast is to check out the sponsors of the show. You can do this by looking at the links in the show notes. That's it for today. I'm Dr. David Beers, and we'll see you next time.